After the Buddha realized awakening and decided to teach, then he first went to the deer park at Vipassanā near Varanasi to teach his former companions, the group of 5 monks. And when the Buddha taught the group of 5 monks his first discourse, the first disciple of the Buddha realizes the Dhamma. Venerable Anattā-Lakkhana becomes a stream enterer, realizes the first stage of awakening. And then the Buddha continues to live at the deer park at Vipassanā near Varanasi. And he spends his first vasa, his first rains retreat there after his awakening, and is teaching and instructing the group of 5 monks to lead them to liberation. And they really have excellent practice conditions there, living together with the Buddha. If you imagine you would live together and meditate with the Buddha, and only for other people, he would give you always personal instructions every day, living there together with the Buddha, meditating and getting these personal instructions just for you. So sometimes the Buddha even sends 2 or 3 monks to go on alms rounds to collect the food for the whole group. In that way, they can just listen to the Buddha's instruction and apply them and meditate under his supervision without having to do anything else. So it's just 2 or 3 monks going to get the alms food, and then the other ones just meditating there with the Buddha and getting instructed by him. As the Buddha continues to instruct them, then further 2 of them realize stream entry, Venerable Vappa and Venerable Padya. The names are almost never mentioned, so I thought once I can mention them at least. They also are the first 5. So they also become stream enterers and want to become monks. And then at some time later, also the last 2 of them realize stream entry, Venerable Mahanama and Venerable Asaji. And the Buddha continues to instruct his first 5 monk disciples like that, probably for several weeks. And then he sees that their spiritual faculties are mature enough, that they are able to realize the same liberation that the Buddha himself realized, and become the first Arahant disciples of the Buddha. And for that purpose, he is teaching them the discourse on non-self. Maybe you still remember from the last month, in the first discourse, the Dhamma-Sutta, he's talking about the Four Noble Truths, and then he explains about the Noble Truth of suffering, or dukkha. And he says, in brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. And so now the Buddha is teaching the monks again that the 5 aggregates all form feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. That all conditioned experience is decaying, unsatisfactory, or suffering, and that they should see it as it really is, like this. This is not mine, I'm not this, this is not myself. So that they abandon the attachment or clinging to all conditioned phenomena and become completely liberated. I think I just briefly go through the content of the Buddha's discourse with some short comments by me, and because the content is actually very short. And then maybe more about how to apply the teaching of non-self practically. And so the Buddha starts by saying form is not self. If form were self, then form would not lead to affliction, and one might be able to wish or have it, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. So if form were self, then one could just decide either my body or the forms externally should just be in a certain way that I like it. But actually, form is not self, and therefore it leads to affliction or is afflicted. And one is not able to say, with regard to form, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. And so, we assume that form, for example, our body, is what we are or what belongs to us. That we have this sort of impression that we have the power to control form. But actually the extent to which we can control or influence our body or whatever material form outside is quite limited, actually. And so the same with feeling, the experience of pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, then there we sort of assume that feeling is what we are or what belongs to us. It's out of our feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. But actually we don't have this control. My feeling should be like that, or my feeling should not be like that. And the influence is quite limited. And the same with all mental phenomena, perception, formations, and consciousness. And then the Buddha continues in the second part of the discourse. What do you think, monks? Is form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. But is that which is impermanent happiness or suffering or unsatisfactory? So it's unsatisfactory. But is it fit to consider that which is impermanent, unsatisfactory, of the nature to decay, as this is mine, I'm this is myself? It is not, Venerable Sir. So in the second part of this discourse, the Buddha points out that what we see as self, or I or mine, is actually subject to decay, subject to affliction, or being unsatisfactory, or suffering. And then he asks, if something is decaying and unsatisfactory, is it then a good idea to regard this as I, mine, or self? And then in the last part of the discourse, the Buddha says then, whatever form there is, past, future, present, internal or external, gross or subtle, interior or superior, far or near, all form should by means of right wisdom be seen as it really is thus. This is not mine, I'm not this is not myself. And so these 5 monks were already noble disciples and prepared by practicing, personally instructed by the Buddha for several weeks. And so in this case, as these 5 monks listened to the teaching of the Buddha, it has such a powerful impact that they actually see all form, feeling, and so on as impermanent or decaying and unsatisfactory and alien, not self. And so, seeing it like this, then the hearts become dispassionate towards the 5 khandhas. And by this passion, their hearts are liberated. And so they realize the same liberation that the Buddha himself realized under the Bodhi tree. And they become the first 5 arrant disciples of the Buddha. So the information of the discourse is actually quite short. It's almost just 3 paragraphs, which are then repeated 5 times for each khandha. the main purpose of the teaching of non-self is to investigate and see how a sense of identity, of who or what we are, is connected with the arising of suffering or feeling disturbed or insecure. And that our impression, who we are, what we are, our sense of identity is something created by our mind. And so this impression of I or mine is not inherently there or pointing to some entity, but the Buddha calls it I-making and mind-making. So there's some sort of process going on in the mind which creates this sense of I and mine, or the Buddha also calls it a conceiving I am. And this impression I am, or this conceiving I am, this I-making, mind-making, that we have, that arises dependent on a mental activity called, usually it's translated as clinging, upadana in Pali. I would translate it literally maybe as, you can see, appropriating something or taking something. So this Pali word adana means giving something, and then adana means taking something. So so just like that, if you say, if I want to take this bowl, this gong for myself, then that is what, take it for myself. And it's, you can see how this taking is always for this entity which has control over it, then, or to whom it belongs. And so taking up something or appropriating something as I and mine. And the Buddha gives also a little simile, one in the Khanda Samyutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, where he says that the five aggregates, the five khandas, he calls them the burden. And so by this activity of clinging or appropriating, we pick up this burden of form and feeling and perception and so on. And because these five khandas are naturally heavy or burdensome, in the sense that they are afflicted by decay and by actually being impermanent. And so in this way, you could say by this process of clinging or appropriating, then we pick up this burden, what is actually heavy for us. And this process of I-making and mind-making is like a strategy of the mind to look for something stable and secure and to feel happy and confident. And we sort of, either by material possessions, we feel sort of secure and safe. But then when we lose them, we feel sort of shaken. Or by people around us, we sort of take them as belonging to us, or sort of we rely on them, and then if they become different or if they pass away, then we are strongly affected by it. But we are actually relying on them because we want to feel secure. But as the Buddha points out, whatever we sort of appropriate as I and mine is actually decaying and subject to affliction. And so our own I-making and mind-making is, the Buddha says, connected with the arising of suffering, or as long as we rely on something which is naturally subject to decay and sort of imperfect, then naturally, if we ground our stability of our life on that, then we will be shaken when it becomes different. then on the other hand, if we can abandon this tendency for I-making and mind-making and see form and feeling and the other khandhas like this is not mine, I'm not this is not myself, then the Buddha says we can realize true stability or peace. The group of 5 monks, they saw these 5 aggregates as non-self, and they became already liberated by just listening to this discourse and practicing before that already in these weeks together with the Buddha. But we have to practice to develop in this direction to be able to do that. And so it will not sort of happen mysteriously on its own that we, for example, have some insight into non-self. And the Buddha says in various discourses that the perception of non-self, perception of impermanence, perception of suffering, that this is something that we have to develop. And about 1 year before the Buddha's final Nibbana, then the Buddha is teaching the monks several sets of qualities that will lead to prosperity and non-decline of the monks' community. And for example, also there he says that as long as the monks develop the perception of impermanence and non-self, then they can expect to prosper and not to decline. So it's even like a factor of how long the dispensation of the Buddha, the monastic order, continues. Or in one discourse of the middle-length discourses, the Buddha also says, if you're a disciple of the Buddha who follows his instruction, you should see all form, feeling, perception, formations and consciousness with proper wisdom thus. This is not mine, I'm not this is not myself. So basically he defines whether you're a disciple who is following his teaching by whether you do this or not, whether you develop this perception of non-self, at least in some suttas. This is one angle on it, how one could define it. So how can we practice that, to do that? And for example, how can we see form, either the body or external things, like this is not mine, I'm not this is not myself. And so first more on a basic level, and then more immeasurable. And the Buddha also sometimes talks about you can develop an immeasurable perception of impermanence, an immeasurable perception of dukkha, immeasurable perception of non-self. And so one way to see form as not mine is, as Ajahn Dhammasija already said, practicing generosity, giving and sharing. And obviously being possessive about your material belongings. This is how we see form as mine. It's just a very basic thing. And on the other hand, if you share your material belongings with others, that's a way of inclining your heart to see form more and more as not mine, or be less possessive about it. And so the Buddha says when a good person gains wealth, then he uses this wealth for his own benefit and enjoyment, but then also shares it with the parents, with the wife or the husband and the children, with friends or colleagues or workers and other people. And so, that's obviously a very different attitude than being possessive. And the Buddha even recommends this attitude of sharing your material requisites for the monks as well. So whatever the food they get or robes they get, that they have this attitude of sharing them, and rather than being possessive about them. It's just obviously a very obvious attitude which works against this tendency of seeing form as mine, and also leads to more like unity and harmony in the community, the Buddha says. Another attitude that reduces the mind-making for form is contentment. So for monks and nuns, the idea would be that they just have these few material requisites and use them wisely, reflecting for a specific purpose. Yeah, so for example, the basic things that you need is shelter, like some lodging, clothing, food and medicine. And yeah, so the idea is that the monks use the robes to protect them from cold and heat and covering the body. That they use the lodging to protect them from the weather, heat and cold, and from mosquitoes and snakes and so on, for living in seclusion. And then they use the food to keep the body healthy and alive, and medicines to cure or prevent sickness. And at your ordination, when you become a monk, then the senior monk gives you some short instruction about the 4 requisites, and as part of the ceremony. And the senior monk says the holy life, the monk's life, has living at the root of a tree as support. And as long as you live, you should make an effort with that. So the basic material support is for lodging is the root of a tree. And then extra various kinds of buildings and huts. Or then the holy life has robes made of discarded rags or discarded cloth as support. So this is the basic sort of, he's then telling you what can you expect as the minimum while you're a monk, and then extras are new robes made from cotton or whatever other cloth, or then the alms food that you just collect some food and alms round as support. And so if you imagine that you live content and happily with just some simple hut or lodging, with some food that people offer to you, with a few cloth requisites, and then you have already abandoned a huge amount of mind-making with regard to form. I think usually one doesn't see it like that, but it's obviously quite something already. And so, for example, when I was a new monk in Citta Viveka, then the monks and the novices, they would change their lodgings every 2 or 3 months. And so Ajahn Sucitto encouraged us that we should be able to move out of our meditation hut in 30 minutes, being capable to do that. Because why would you spend lots of time of packing things? Obviously, if you're a monk, you wouldn't have to pack for 3 hours, hopefully, to get your things together. You can just sort of move out in half an hour and don't have to move 2 caravans of furniture or something like that. And so on the other hand, I remember, for example, when I was about 10 years old, then I moved with my mother to another flat, obviously, which is like a huge operation. Then if you move all this furniture and all these belongings, then and so you can see this effect of seeing form as mine, and that you actually abandon quite some mind-making with regards to form. So if you appropriate lots of things, if you appropriate lots of form as mine, then it sort of becomes very burdensome, and you have to sort of transport it around and look after it. But for example, like let's say if you have a big property, a big house, then in one way there's some sort of gratification in it, but then also you have to look after this property and sort of look after this house and so on. So there was sort of this nice thing about it, but then also this not so nice thing about this sort of material possessions. While the Buddha says that if you are content with just a minimum of requisites, then you will experience a great sense of freedom and lightness. So the Buddha gives this simile that the monk is content with his robes to cover his body and with the alms food that he eats, and wherever he goes, he only takes those with him, just like a bird who flies only with his wings. And so, giving this nice simile of this sense of freedom if you don't have 3 truckloads of belongings. But yeah, even if you're not a monk or nun, you can still obviously develop this attitude of contentment to some extent. And yeah, if you earn enough money for sort of a reasonable, comfortable life, then yeah, you actually already have enough, and that you have some shelter, some lodging, you have food, clothing, and some medicinal care if you're sick. And so why trying to accumulate always more? Because yeah, no matter how much you have, you can always still want more. Not if you have maybe you have a flat and a small house, then maybe you can still want a mansion, or if you have 2 cars already, you can still want a 3rd car. And some people even collect of cars, and if they have enough money, and yeah, or even if you're CEO of a big company, have already $100 million, then you can still want more. There's no end to it. Or if you're king or politician, then you rule over a whole country. It's also an extreme form of mind-making of form. That it's your country, your kingdom, it belongs to you. At least that's how you perceive it. But obviously, you have only limited control. Even then, even if you're king, then you still have only limited control over this country, what happens there. And but yeah, then even if you're king or politician, you can still want more and conquer other countries around you as well. So that's why the Buddha says contentment is the greatest wealth. So, because if you are content, you always have enough, even if you have very few possessions. But if you don't have contentment, then you can be extremely rich, but you're still dissatisfied and always still want more. And yeah, so this practicing generosity or sharing with others or having this quality of contentment, then yeah, it's a way how you can reduce the mind making with regard to form, and which is not so, yeah, that you can actually practically somehow do that or incline your minds towards that rather than towards accumulating. On a more profound level, the way to see all form, external and internal, as not mine and not self, is by developing mindfulness of the body. Specifically, the contemplation of the 32 body parts and the decaying nature of the body, and then based on that, the contemplation of the 4 elements. That's just like the Buddha describes it in the Vipassanā Sutta. So, yeah, in the Anattā-Lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha asks the monks, what do you think, monks, is form permanent or impermanent? And is it suffering or happiness? And so, many of these coarser forms of suffering that we experience are connected with the body. The birth and sickness and aging and death. And then the impermanence and decay of the body and the suffering we experience because of that. Yeah, they all have something to do with the body. And so if you want to see form as impermanent or unsatisfactory and non-self, then yeah, you have to develop mindfulness of the body in this way. And yeah, so the Buddha gives these 3 ways of developing mindfulness of the body, which are a very direct practice of developing the perception of non-self with regard to the body. And the 32 parts of the body. the monk reviews the same body up from the soles of the feet, down from the top of the hair, bound by skin, filled with various kinds of unattractive things, for example with hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bone, and so on. And so he says, just like if someone would look into a bag which is filled with different kinds of grains, like rice and beans, and then he would look into it and say, this is rice, these are beans, and so on. And so, obviously, developing this mindfulness of the body with regard to the 32 body parts is a very direct way of seeing the body as non-self. It's that usually we have this impression of an entity of the body, but then it's actually, it's just like hair and skin and flesh, and we somehow perceive the whole thing as what we are. But then, if you look at it in this way, then you sort of change your perception about it. Develop a different perception of non-self. And it's also very simple to apply. That one can, if one doesn't have clear images of these organs of the body, then one can just look at a skeleton, for example, or anatomy books, or like this Body Worlds catalog for exhibition, to see how these different body parts actually look like. And so then, for example, with bones, one just, on the one hand you feel the body part, for example, the bones, you can feel the bones, various areas, and you can visualize the bones and feel them, for example in the hand, and then you just, similar like with maybe mindfulness of breathing, you can just repeat the word bones, or ati, and visualizing the bones and feeling them, feeling the area, feeling the bones, and then developing that with different areas of the body. And similar, for example, with skin, and you can feel the skin touching the robe or the clothing, and the skin covers the body like a membrane, and the hair is growing out of it, and whatever the hair on the legs is just like the head hair in principle. It's just similar, it's just like hair. And so, then the decaying nature of the body is another thing that the Buddha teaches us as a way of developing this perception of decay and non-self with regard to form. So, for example, one visualizes a skeleton in front of you, and then you just feel your body sitting upright and contemplate, this body is of the same nature, this is how it will be, this is how it will end. And so, this is a way of developing this different perception of the body. And these contemplations also can be done in all 4 body postures. Also, I usually do it with open eyes. So of this perception of the body and the body parts sort of merges with your usual perception of the body, so it becomes sort of different. And then it's also something pleasant if you practice it correctly. Then, just like with any other meditation object, you can develop mindfulness, investigation of the Dhamma, and based on this contemplation, the mind gets free from the 5 hindrances and either uplifted and bright or peaceful and calm, if you practice it correctly. And then, based on these 32 parts of the body and the decaying nature of the body, you can contemplate the 4 elements. They're usually called earth, water, fire, and air. but sounds maybe abstract. How do you feel the earth in your body or the water or something like that? But yeah, we can recognize these four elements in our own experience. It's just a very different way of looking at our experience. And so, for example, the earth element is this feeling of like the hardness or solidity. So, for example, in the bones, you can feel the solidity, or in nails, of hardness. Or if you sit on the cushion, you can feel the hardness, to some extent, some resistance of the cushion, and of your body parts as well. Or of the knee, you can feel some hardness, or the teeth. And some have more earth element. So, for example, the teeth or the nails have stronger earth element than, for example, the muscles. It's just a little bit. Then the air element would be the movement or wind. The fire element would be feeling of coolness or heat. So you can feel, if you feel your body, for example, then different areas feel cooler or warmer. And it's also something you can actually directly experience. And then, similar with liquid, it would be the liquid parts of the body, like the blood or the tears and so on. But also the sense of this quality of cohesion or binding things together. So if you imagine, for example, that, let's say your body would dry up, the liquid goes out, then it would just sort of crumble into dust. So it wouldn't keep together. And so that is and also a very direct way of seeing form as non-self. The Buddha even gives this direct instructions where he teaches Venerable Rahula, his own son, Majjhima Nikaya 62. He says, for example, the hair and the nails and the teeth and the skin, the flesh, and so on. This is called the internal earth element. And both the internal earth element and the external earth element, so this is also like solid, or this just like the knee or whatever. They are simply the earth element. And that should be seen as it actually is, as proper wisdom does. This is not mine, I'm not this is not myself. And when one sees it thus, with proper wisdom, one becomes disenchanted and dispassionate towards the earth element. So this is even directly instructing, just in the same way like in the Anattā-Lakkhana Sutta. And in one discourse, Majjhima Nikaya, the first discourse in the middle-length discourses, the Buddha says that the difference between the ordinary person, a noble disciple, and an arahant is exactly how they relate to these four elements. So depending on how you see these four elements and how you relate to them, that makes a difference whether you're a normal person or a noble disciple or an arahant. So it's obviously important to contemplate them or look at them in a different way. And so if we contemplate these four elements, then the Buddha also says one can develop an immeasurable perception of impermanence and dukkha and non-self with regard to the entire earth element and all form. So this perception of impermanence and dukkha and non-self from the body can sort of then, if you contemplate the earth element, internal and external, sort of pervade outwards to the entire earth element, to all form. And so the Buddha, or like how the Buddha defines perception, is part of it is sanjanati. You can translate it as knowing together, maybe literally, so in the sense that you recognize the similarity between different things. So for example, there are all these people sitting here, and they look quite different. So some are women, some are men, some are old, some are young, some are tall, and some are short. But I can recognize that they're all people, even though they are slightly different. And so this quality of perception would be this ability to recognize this similarity. Or similar with colors, like we say with brown, different brown shades, you can all recognize it as brown. And this would be this capability of perception. Or then, for example, with food, you could recognize that all these different things there on the table are food. And then, let's say a banana looks very different from rice, but you can still recognize that this is food. And so the Buddha describes how we have this very diverse perception of our environment, and then if you develop this perception of the earth element, of the 4 elements, then all these different perceptions get, you could say, like wiped out and just replaced with this one perception. The Buddha describes it quite graphic here. Majjhima Nikāya 121. So, for example, someone doesn't attend to the perception of people, to the perception of forest, but just attends to the singleness of the perception of the earth element. And then he says, just like a bull's hide becomes free from all folds when it's fully stretched with 100 pegs. So in the same way, not attending to any ridges or hollows of the earth, to rivers or mountains or whatever things, he just attends to the singleness of the earth element. And so, we have these different perceptions of diversity, and then by contemplating the earth element, one can develop a different perception of which is conducive to, on the one hand, calm, but then also to disenchantment. And there's a very powerful effect, because then, let's say, for example, then you have these perceptions of food, and then various defilements associated with the perception of food. And so if you just perceive all this food as earth elements, then all these defilements that are sort of together with this perception of food, they sort of disappear. Or this perception of feminine or masculine, usually this perception of whether someone is feminine or masculine then triggers some attraction. And then, for example, if you develop this perception of the earth element, then depending on the level, then they get abandoned. And so also I think probably for average person it doesn't sound very attractive to develop a perception of impermanence, or of suffering, or of non-self. But actually, if one practices it correctly, then it will lead to liberation, to making the mind peaceful. That's because this tendency of clinging gets abandoned, and then you become free from form, and so the citta experiences a different kind of peace, which is not dependent on form anymore. Just as an example, and so these 4 ways of developing mindfulness of the body is a very direct way to see form as non-self. Obviously, it's the most sort of obvious. In terms of if you want to practice something to see form as not self, then this is it's sort of obvious thing that one can apply for it. Then maybe just one other example. How can we practice to see Sankharas, formations as non-self. It is part of what Sankharas, it's lots of, can be different things included in it. Sometimes the Buddha defines it as will or intention. In part called Cetana, so will, intention, wanting something or craving. And this sort of will or intention can be wholesome or unwholesome. And yeah, you probably noticed that we identify very strongly with what we want, with our own will. I think for most people, this sort of sense of I am and our will or intention seems almost inseparably sort of connected to each other. Then one has this impression, if you see this very much yourself, or one of these centers of identification, what you want, your will or intention. Not because this is what I want, so this wanting is sort of connected with this impression I. Because if you want it, then I want, sort of want this wanting, and then I want it. Yeah, so the Buddha says that the only part of our will which is sort of inseparably connected with conceiving I am is craving, while the other parts of our will can still function completely normal, even if we don't have any conceiving I am anymore. So let's say an arahant can still intend to go here or there, or talk, or plan a project, or so on, and have an intention, but he just doesn't have this tendency of I-making or mind-making around it, even though he has still his intentions in his mind. Then so, in a way to develop this ability to see your will or wanting, craving as non-self is in a way essential. Because otherwise you will just continue to wander around in samsara endlessly. That you want something and some desire arises. You think, that's what I want. And then you want something else. So another desire arises, and again, that's what I want. And so you keep on running around, driven by your wanting, and whatever wanting arises, you follow it. And sort of jumping around like that. And that's what the Buddha means when he says beings are enslaved by craving. That if you continue to identify with your desires, then you will continue to be a slave of your will. You just, whatever will, whatever desire arises, you just follow it like a slave, basically. Basically driven around by your desire or your will, of running around. And so interestingly, we can even want completely contradictory things and still identify with both of them. So that depending on, let's say, whatever, so falling in love, or we want to separate from someone, that then there's this strong desire to be together with this person. And then later, actually you want exactly the opposite, you want to separate from this person. And both times we think, that's what I want. Which is slightly strange, and you believe it, you still believe it, it's the delusion with regards to this wanting, how this wanting creates the sense of I am, that's what I want. Or similar with wanting to become a monk and disrobing, that someone wants to become a monk. And then a few years later, actually, he wants exactly the opposite, he wants to disrobe. And so, in both times, this person thinks, that's what I want. And he believes it. Sort of, if you think about it, it's quite strange, but then that's somehow we are sort of confused, or not. We can see that we're actually just sort of running around and following that. But actually it's completely contradictory. this wantings, and we always believe that's what I want. And so for practicing to see will or wanting or craving as non-self, the Buddha teaches a gradual approach. For example, if you like to keep the 5 precepts, then you have to see any intention to break them as non-self. Because if you identify with this intention to break the precepts, then you will just follow it. So, for example, if you like to drink alcohol, at least sometimes, and then if you identify with this wanting to drink, then we'll just continue with it and actually break the precept. Or you're staying at the monastery on 8 precepts and you want to eat something in the afternoon, and then if you identify with this desire, then you will just go ahead and eat something because that's what you want, so you just follow it. And so seeing your intention or will or desires as non-self and not to identify with them gives you this possibility to reflect that you want something, some desire arises, and then to reflect, is this actually useful or beneficial or not? This desire or this wanting this or that, to what extent is this beneficial or useful? And well, if you don't have this capability to see it as non-self or as just a phenomena that arises in your mind, you will just identify with it and think that's what you want. Obviously, because sometimes what we want is actually not beneficial for us and not leading in the right direction. And there's also this sort of deceptive element in it. The stronger the desire is, the more we identify with it. That if you have a very strong desire, then you feel, I really want that. We identify very strong with it. The stronger the desire or what we want, the more we tend to identify with it. And also this sort of illusion of freedom, then if you follow it, then we feel sort of free because we can do what we want. But actually we're just sort of slaves of our will, sort of running around, being driven by these intentions. Or that if we have a strong desire, we feel somehow it's sort of expression of a deepest inner being. Somehow it seems like very real, that's sort of our most inner wish or whatever. And sort of to question that as well, or to see, that's actually, it's sort of different. Yes.
Sometimes identifying with the mind, just seeing the mind,
Mm-hmm.
and a desire arises.
Mm-hmm.
Say, I want to eat chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, oh no, but I'm on a diet.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I can see now there's 2 forms of wanting to be healthy and wanting the chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
But then the desire for chocolate starts growing and it gets
Yes.
louder, and you go, oh, okay, fine, go to the shop, buy some chocolate and eat that. And then the desire for chocolate's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So when satisfying the craving, the craving's gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sort of looking at it and just wondering if there's a method. Well, I can see the method actually, it's just seeing that. But I guess that's exactly what you're saying, playing with that double edge, wanting the thing,
Mm.
and it's the same wanting.
I think that's also what I would talk about very soon. Anyway, it's if we, let's say, it's also useful to see desire as non-self, because then you can start investigate how does it actually come to be that I want something so much. How does this? Why did I end up wanting that so much? And some other person wants something completely different. Well, I know maybe some person likes to do paragliding, and another person finds it boring, or someone likes to watch football games, and the other person finds it boring, and so on. How does this actually come to be that you want this or that? And that once we sort of become sort of aware that our will or desires are not sort of expression of our innate being, but just dependently originated, then once we know that, we can start to, say, undermine the causes for our desires that lead in the wrong direction, and of developing the causes that leads to our will going in the right direction, and actually developing a very powerful will that goes in the direction of Dhamma. And so I would say that the main causes for where your will is going is what kind of perceptions you develop, or what kind of perceptions you dwell on. So to what extent do you see something as attractive or worthwhile, or unattractive or not worthwhile? And sort of what gratification do you expect of something, or what harm or disadvantage? And then the stronger you direct sort of unwise attention to this, often different things, they have a kind of gratification to it, but also a disadvantage. And so the more you dwell with unwise attention on the gratification that you get out of it, the more of irresistible will be the desire, to the point where you just feel, oh, if I can't resist it, it's just I just have to do that. And so, sometimes it's sort of more obvious, let's say, with addiction. And let's say, for example, I myself, I don't have to make some special efforts to have no intentions to drink alcoholic drinks. And already as a teenager, I found the taste repulsive, and additionally then, I developed this strong perception of the disadvantages of drinking alcohol from knowing the teaching of the Buddha. So this sort of desire doesn't come really up in my mind. But for someone who sort of likes to drink alcoholic drinks and sort of finds it enjoyable, it will be very difficult to stop drinking, because he has this strong perception of there's something nice and something attractive, and he gets some gratification out of it. And so if he wants to abandon this of desire to drink, then he has to make a lot of efforts to dismantle these distorted perceptions of attractiveness with regard to alcohol. And that is often over years you have built up these perceptions of attractiveness for certain activities, whatever you like to do. And then to actually dismantle them, then you have to change the way you look at things. And so that is, the Buddha regularly talks about this investigation of seeing the gratification, the disadvantage, and the escape. Why do you perceive something as attractive or alluring? And how great is this gratification or happiness that you get out of it, really? And what is the disadvantage and danger in something? And so he says, the clearer you see the disadvantage or the danger of things that fetter you, then the less you will want them, and the less you will be interested in them. And so this desire, which makes us believe this is what I want, then sort of disappears. And this is called the escape. And so on the one hand, one has to look, when do you direct attention to this perception that this is attractive? And on the other hand, with your thinking, when you think about, how do you think about it? How do you look at it? And then how can you correct these perceptions so that you see the disadvantage very clear or very graphic? And so obviously it can be something impressive if some desire disappears like that and it doesn't arise anymore. And when you can really see that this desire was actually not what I wanted, but it was just sort of a craving that seeks delight here and there. It was non-self, and now it has disappeared. Even though I thought, had this impression, this is sort of what I want. And then sort of, if you've seen this is actually not self, because you develop this different way of looking at things, it doesn't come up anymore. So this takes a lot of training, because it's more like an autopilot, where you just automatically go to this gratifying aspect of what you desire, and then to develop a different perception takes usually considerable effort. And also, as I said, if you see your will as something dependently originated, then it helps you to develop a strong will or powerful intention to practice the Dhamma. And often people have some aspirations or intentions to practice and do something beneficial, but then the intention disappears and fades away. And why stay some people motivated and some they just sort of disappears, the interest disappears. And so often people assume that we can just have an intention to always want something. I always want to meditate, and then I wanted it once, and then I always want it. But that's actually not. We don't have this power, because actually our will is not self. We can just determine. I always want to want that. But depending on what you do with your mind, how you think about things, look at things. But, so if you develop the wrong perceptions, look at things in the wrong way, reflect things about things in the wrong way, then your wholesome aspiration or intention can also disappear. And because will is also not self. And then this is also the reason why the Buddha teaches in a way which gives rise to these two qualities of, it's called in Pali, Samvega and Pasada. So on the one hand, trying to stir up a sense of urgency, in the sense of showing the disadvantages of not practicing the Dhamma, or showing the disadvantages of going in the wrong direction with your life. And on the other hand, this quality of Pasada, something like a confidence or brightness or inspiration, that's from the benefits that you can get from practicing the Dhamma, or from living a life which is beneficial. And so the more you look at things and reflect about things in this way, then if you develop perceptions and reflect about things in a way which give rise to this quality of urgency or inspiration, then, and the stronger you have this present in your mind, then your will be very powerful, going in the direction of Dhamma. And if you keep these causes, keep it going, then it will get stronger and stronger over time, even rather than fading away. So your sort of will to practice the Dhamma can either sort of gradually sort of disappear, or it can get more and more powerful and strong, depending on how you reflect what you do with your mind. And it's not something mysterious that, I just don't want it, and sort of not so interesting, or so inspired. But it depends on how you think about things, what perceptions you cultivate. so some examples for practically developing this perception of non-self or not mine is form, practicing generosity, sharing, developing contentment, contemplating the body, or then seeing will, intention as non-self, or having this perspective. Obviously, one could also give some other examples for, say, with regard to feeling or formations or consciousness, but I think I'll just leave it on these few examples, also already late. The more you see the five aggregates you experience as self or belonging to self, the stronger you appropriate them as I and mine, the more you are sort of limited and bound by form and feeling and perception and conditioned experience. The more you are bound to what is decaying and suffering. And the Buddha gives a nice little simile. He says it's just like if there's a post or a pillar and a dog is tied to it with a leash, and then this dog would always run around this pillar or stand close to the pillar or sits down close to the pillar. And the Buddha says, so too the ordinary person sees form as self or belonging to self. He sees feeling as self or belonging to self. And so on. And so is always revolving around form and feeling and perception, formations and consciousness, and he doesn't get liberated from them. So just like the dog who is tied to this post is sort of always running around the post. So by seeing these five aggregates as self, we sort of tie to them and always revolving around them. But on the other hand, the more you can abandon what is decaying and subject to suffering, the more you can experience some immeasurable freedom and peace of cessation, of nibbana. And so the Buddha even says this little simile, Majjhima Nikāya 20. It says, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. What is it that is not yours? Material form is not yours. Abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. And feeling is not yours. Abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness for a long time. And so pointing to this fact that if this process of I-making and man-making becomes less strong, then we will experience some peace, just like on a more basic level we can maybe notice it. For example, let's say with these accumulating things, like I described, with then you're sort of burdened by these possessions, and then if you have just some basic possessions and contentment, then actually it feels more peaceful and more light. And so on a basic level maybe one can experience that sometimes, this freedom of seeing this less as I and mine.